writing the methodology chapter of your dissertation or thesis. As you can see here, these are the learning outcomes. So at the end of this presentation, you should be able to recognize the features of a methodology chapter, and also you'll be able to determine the right research method for your study. You'll be able to also describe and justify the decision or the action that you take in your study. And also you'll be able to write your methodology chapter. So this is a course outline, and there are three main issues that I'm going to talk about. So the first one is what the methodology chapter entails, the essence of writing your methodology chapter. And also I'm going to talk about the various components of the methodology chapter. What does the methodology chapter entail? When you are looking at your methodology chapter, people want to see the purpose, what you intend to do or what you are going to do compared to writing a recipe. When you are writing a recipe, you have to list what you have to take to make a meal, right? So that when you give the recipe to someone, the person doesn't have to call you. The person can just follow the recipe and the person will be able to do what you expect the person to do. So that's all about the writing methodology. You have to first state, what are you going to do? And also talk about the actions and the processes in terms of collecting your data, in terms of analyzing your data. And also you're going to talk about the specific strategies that you're going to use. What are the research tools that you're going to use? What are the specific methodology related strategies that you're going to use to assess participants or assess the source of your data? Think about how to extract information from participants and also analyze and address your research question or test your hypothesis that you have. You are not only telling people or your readers what you're going to do, you have to also provide a justification. Why are you taking specific actions? Why are you using this methodology? You have to give a very good reason why, so that people will trust the process, the thinking behind your choices in terms of methodology. When it comes to the essence, you want to show to your readers what you would do, right? So let's say you are writing a dissertation proposal or thesis proposal, and you want to tell people, this is what I'm going to do. You also want to promote transparency in the research process. If you want people to believe what you found, you have to provide all the actions and decisions that you are going to take in the studies. You have to show how you got to your destination so that people will trust the findings. And also it improves the credibility of your findings. It's quite related to the transparency process, because if you are transparent, people will believe what you found, and it also increases the credibility of your findings. People will trust your findings. It's also a way of educating your readers, right? You are trying to not only telling people what you did, but also leaving an information or very good information there so that at the end of the day, people can replicate, right? You are teaching people the actions and the decision that you took. And then future researchers can do the same thing or do similar things so that they'll be able to do a quality research. So it's a way of educating your readers too. So these are the reasons why it's important to write your research methodology. In terms of the components, sometimes it depends on the requirement of your institution. I try to bring the components that are dominant or most of the institution required. So you always have to start with an overview or introduction to the chapter, right? So you have to introduce your readers to this chapter. You tell them what you intend to do or what the chapter entails. You also have to state your research question or your hypothesis, and also provide a justification. Why do you think it's important to address these questions? Why do you think it's important to test your hypothesis that you have? And also you have to think about your research design and then try to describe the research method that you are using and why you are using it. Another one is the population and sample. Where are you going to get access to your participants? Who are your participants? How are you going to sample them? What are the sampling strategy are you going to use? You also have to think about the procedure. This procedure is giving step by step in a chronological manner how you intend to collect your data. What actions are you going to take? Are you going to extract your information online? Are you going to physically see participants and collect information from them? Any step that you are going to take in relation to your data collection, you have to provide that information, right? And also instrumentation, all the tools that you use to help you to extract information from participants or data from participants or data from a specific source, you have to provide that information. The data processing, how are you going to process your data? How are you going to analyze your data? How are you going to make meaning of your data so that you'll be able to address the research question that you have? Another one is the quality assurance. What are you going to do to make sure that your study meets a specific required standard in terms of doing research, in terms of validity, reliability? When you're doing a qualitative study, you have to think about credibility, transferability, and I'll talk in detail about all these things. But when you think about quality assurance, think about standards that has been set for you to do a quality research. And you as a researcher have to know the standards so that you do things in line with those standards. Limitations, whether you are choosing a very good tool or not, there's always going to be weaknesses, right, behind the actions and the decision and the strategies and the tools that you're going to use. So you have to think about the weaknesses and then provide those information to your readers. Ethical assurance, how are you going to make sure that everything that you do are in line with the ethics in relation to doing research? And then you end by summarizing what you have written. So that's all about a component. And we're going to go into detail. I'm going to try to break it down so that you know what you have to write under each of the sections. Before you write, you have to think about these things. Are you going to write in a first person point of view or a third person point of view? Are you going to write in the future tense or past tense? Let's start with whether you want to write a first person or third person. For me, I follow the APA requirement. They recommend that you can write in the first person. So you can say that I collected the data from this participant. It's all about trying to let readers know the action that you took so that they will know what you did and the things that you did in the study. Some people focus on writing the third person point of view. They say the researcher. The idea behind using a third person is that you want to demonstrate that you are disconnected from what you are studying. It's also a way of showing that you are being objective. You are not influencing the process. So you are separating yourself from the study. By doing that, you want to show to people that you are being objective. So that's the main reason why people use the third person point of view when they are writing. In this case, it always depends on what your supervisor is telling you. Some supervisors will tell you write in the first person. Others will tell you to write in the third person. So the most important is to make sure that you are going by what your dissertation chair or supervisor is telling you. I think writing in the first person will be great. Another way of also deciding is you can look for articles in your area of expertise or in your field and see how they write. Then you can follow the pattern. If you are writing a proposal, you have to write it in the future tense, right? You are telling people what you intend to do, right? So proposal will be the future. And then when you finish writing a proposal and you finish collecting your data, analyzing and writing a report, a dissertation document, then you can change everything to the past tense, right? What you did in terms of the action that you took in the study. So let's start with the overview. As you are trying to let people know what exactly you're going to write or what exactly is in the chapter. First, you have to briefly state the research problem. What is the specific gap that you have identified in the literature that you want to do research and address? For the problem statement or the research problem, you have already written in chapter 1, so you don't have to go into detail. The essence of presenting this information is to remind your readers about the problem that you want to focus on and also the purpose of the study. So brief information about the research problem and also the purpose would be great. just to remind them. After reminding them about your problem and purpose, you go into what the chapter entails. So this is where you can give a brief information about, okay, this chapter talks about the specific approach that I'm going to use in the study. It's also going to talk about how I'm going to select participant and select participant and collect data from them and analyze to address my research question or to test my hypothesis. Just a brief information to let people know what is in the chapter will be great and what they should expect. It's quite linked to presenting detailed information. So that's all about overview, reminding your audience about the purpose and the problem that you want to address and telling them what is in this document that you want to write about or present to them. Then you talk about your research questions and or your hypothesis and provide justification. So here, what you have to do is to state your research question or your hypothesis that you have. Then you provide the reason why you think it's important for you to address these questions or test this hypothesis. In terms of research questions, if you are doing a qualitative study, your research question should be open-ended because qualitative study is all about exploring. You are doing exploratory study. One example here is, how do people experience happiness at their workplace? So you see, it starts with how, it can start with why, it can start with what. Always an open-ended research question when you are doing a qualitative study. Because if you make it close-ended, your answer will be yes or no. In qualitative study, we will not be able to have a precise kind of answer. We just want to explore participant perspectives concerning an issue. Making your research question open-ended when you're doing a qualitative study will be very important. When you're doing quantitative study, you have to make your research question, most of them, close-ended. So one example here is, does happiness impact performance in a workplace? So you see how the answer will be yes or no based on what you're going to find. You're going to use numbers to determine whether happiness impacts performance in a workplace. So the difference is the qualitative should be exploratory research question, quantitative should be confirmatory research question. But there's a caveat here. One thing that you have to think about is that sometimes when you're doing a quantitative study, you can have an open-ended question. One question could be, what are the levels of happiness of employees? So you are just looking for the levels. You are not doing research to confirm anything. You are just measuring the levels and then reporting that information. So sometimes you can have an open-ended question concerning when you are doing a quantitative study. Sometimes people get confused about the different kinds of hypotheses. So I put this table together just to help you to refresh your mind concerning how to construct hypotheses, what are the differences. So normally your supervisor will say you should have maybe a null hypothesis and also alternative hypothesis. One example is that when you want to determine the relationship between variables, the null hypothesis could be there is no statistically significant relationship between perceived happiness and work performance. There is no, because it's null hypothesis. And the opposite one is the alternative. So there is a statistically significant relationship between perceived happiness and work performance. Beside the two differences that we have, we also have non-directional hypothesis and also directional hypothesis. As the name implies, the non-directional is like you are in the middle, you are neutral in terms of the statement that you want to make. They're not directional, sway to the right or the left side. You are not neutral in terms of stating your hypothesis. So you can see that non-directional hypothesis here, there is a statistically significant different relationship between perceived happiness and work performance. So we are not saying there's a positive or negative. We just say there's going to be a relationship. You see, here, you are saying that there is a statistically significant positive relationship between perceived happiness and work performance. At this point, you can see that you are giving a direction. You are saying there's going to be a positive. So that makes it a directional hypothesis. So in case your chair or the dissertation supervisor said, okay, all your statements or all your hypotheses should be non-directional, this is how it will look. Let's take another example. determine the difference between two groups about a variable. The non-directional alternative hypothesis will be there is a statistically significant difference of work performance between happy and unhappy employees. So here we are saying that there will be difference. We are not saying one will perform better than the other, but directional, we are giving a direction. We are saying that happy employees will do significantly perform better at work than unhappy employees. You can see here that we have given a direction in terms of what you want to see in the data. So that's brief information about null hypothesis, alternative, and directional and non-directional. The next one that I want to talk about is the justification. So after you have stated your hypothesis or your research question, people want to know why is it important for you to address the questions or test this hypothesis. Normally, you can use the literature that you have reviewed, just to give a little summary and to give a foundational knowledge or support to help people to know that it's very important for you to address this question based on what research has been done. So let's say you have identified a specific gap in the literature. You can use that based on this kind of gap that I have identified. It's very important for me to address these questions so that at the end of the day, I'll be able to complete or fill the gap or address the specific research problem that I have. So giving a justification is very important. People want to know why is it important for you to address? Why do you have to spend time in collecting data, analyzing and addressing these questions that you have? The next one is the research design. The research design, what you have to do is you have to state a specific method for your study, right? So you have to decide, okay, if you are doing a qualitative study, you're going to use phenomenological approach. If that's the case, at this point, you state that phenomenological approach is the approach that I'm going to use for my study. People want to know, what is phenomenological approach? You have to define or provide characteristics of phenomenological approach. Phenomenological approach is used when you want to capture the experience of participants. So you have to identify people who have passed through a specific experience, and then you want to collect data to help you to better understand the experience and also address the research question that you have. You can also provide the strengths and the weaknesses. Sometimes the weaknesses, you can do that by comparing the approach that you have chosen to the potential. In this case, I can compare maybe phenomenological approach to narrative approach, trying to expose the strength and the weaknesses of the approach that I'm using. At this point, when you decide that this is an approach, you have to learn more about it. Learning more about it will help you to know the strength and the weakness, and also help you to provide a good justification concerning the approach that you have chosen. Sometimes you have to cite a source to defend your assertions. So that's all about the research design. You state your approach, you provide more information about it to help readers to understand what the approach is all about. You provide the strengths and the weaknesses, and also provide a reason why you think this approach is appropriate for your study. And then you cite sources to defend assertions or the statement that you have made concerning the approach. In terms of research designs, we have three main types. We have qualitative, quantitative, and mixed method design. For quantitative, we have a lot, but I just want to talk about these four. Descriptive design is more of you are doing research to describe a specific phenomenon or a variable. You are using numbers to describe. So let's say you are studying the levels of happiness among a group of people, and you just want to measure their happiness and report that information. So you can use a descriptive design. Correlational design is all about finding out whether there's a relationship between variables. Experiment is when you are comparing groups, right? So you've got a control group and experimental group, and then compare concerning a specific variable that you are focusing on. It's quasi because you did not randomly assign them to the control group or experimental group. You just chose a group and make them a control, and then you chose another group and make them experimental group, a group that you're going to apply a specific treatment to them. A true experiment is where you randomly select participants from the population and randomly assign them to the control group and experimental group. That makes your design, experimental design. And also the next one is the qualitative design. So you have grounded theory. You want to develop a theory. Because you want to develop a theory, you want to collect data so that the theory will be based on the data. So if you plan to develop a theory to explain a specific process, a behavior, or a phenomenon, then grounded theory will be the best. If you want to capture participant experience, they have experienced something and you want them to share the experience with you, it's phenomenological approach. Ethnography is more of going to participants' natural environment, maybe their workplace, observe what they are doing. Sometimes you have to interview some of them. You have to participate and do what you are doing. At the end of the day, you want to gather rich information so that it helps you to understand a specific issue that you are focusing on. Narrative, you want to tell a story. You want to collect data from participants, allow participants to share their story, and then you collect that information and you retell the story. Case study is all about focusing on a well-defined case based on the location, based on the time that happened, sometimes based on a specific characteristic that a case has. And you want to collect data from multiple sources to help you to better understand the case or describe the case for people to know, to highlight the components of the case. You can also do a study by combining two methodologies, quantitative and qualitative. This is where the mixed method design comes in. We have two main types. We have the sequential and concurrent. Mixed method design. Sequential means that you are starting with one methodology, finish analyzing everything, and based on the findings, you move on to implement a second methodology. So that makes it sequential. The concurrent means that you are collecting qualitative and quantitative data at the same time. For dissertation, most of the students use concurrent because of time. So they go there, interview participants, and also give out surveys and collect all the information, analyze and address their research question that they have. So these are the main type. And also, if you get access to the PowerPoint, you'll be able to get more information about different kinds of approaches and then how to make a very informed choice concerning the best approach for your study. I have one for quantitative, one for qualitative, and one for the mixed method. So when you get access to the PowerPoint, you'll be able to review and decide. And now we are going to your data source. I just want to emphasize here that population doesn't necessarily mean people. If you plan to collect documents, your population and the sample will be the document. So in research, population is not only focusing on people. So you just have to bear in mind, because you may do a research that you don't need participants, you just need documents to analyze, or you need artifacts to analyze, then you don't have to write about the population. You just have to write about the kind of information or the data that you are extracting information from. So in terms of this population, when you are writing this session, there are three things that people want to know. They want to know more about the population that you are focusing on. They want to know the sampling strategy and also sample size that you have. They also want to know how you plan to recruit your participants. So these are the three things that people want to know when you are writing about population and sample. So let's start with the population. You have to give a brief description about who your population is, and also give a general characteristics, right? There are some detailed information that you don't know until you meet participants and collect demographic information. So at this stage, you are just giving general information. Where are participants located? What is the research location? What are the age range? What are the qualifications? Anything that will help people to know that these are the group of people that you are focusing on. If you can provide that information, that would be great. After providing a population, what are the sampling strategy or sampling technique are you going to use? Are you using purposive sampling? Are you using convenience sampling, snowball, random sampling, or stratified sampling? So you have to decide which sampling technique you want to use. And then when you decide, you have to learn more about it and see the strength and weakness so that you can use it. You have to also think about what are the conditions that participant has to meet for them to be part of your study. In terms of age, in terms of work experience, maybe you can say that they should have at least 2 years of experience, right? They should be 18 and above. they should be all female if you are focusing on only females. So giving specific inclusion criteria, what condition do you think participant has to meet for them to be part of the study? What are the exclusion criteria? What are the things that disqualify them to be part of your study? That will help readers to know who exactly are your participants for your study. Then you talk about the sample size. How many participants do you think will help you to collect rich data to test the hypothesis or address the research question that you have? If you are doing a quantitative study, there's a software called G-Power. When you know the type of analysis that you have to do, the system will give you the estimated number of participants that you need. This is a free software that you can download and use if you are doing a quantitative study. If you are doing a qualitative study, we don't have a formula to determine the number of participants, but we base on best practices. So let's say you are using a phenomenological approach. You have to look into literature and see researchers who have used this approach. How many participants did they use? Did they use 5, 6, 20 participants? If you are using granite theory, how many participants did researchers use? Based on that, you can decide a range of number of participants. But based on my experience, when you are doing a phenomenological approach, for a dissertation or thesis, having about 10 to 15 participants will be great for you to collect rich data to address your research question that you have. If you are doing granite theory study, you have to have more participants because you want to develop a theory. You should have about 20 or 25 participants. If you don't have a lot, you have to think about going back to participants to collect more information from them, doing a follow-up interview. So there are many ways to help you to determine the number of participants for your study for when you're doing a qualitative study. When you know the number of participants, the next one that you have to describe is, how do you plan to recruit participants? So you have to think about, when do you want to recruit participants? Where do you want to recruit participants? And how do you want to recruit participants? In terms of where, you can think about, are you doing it online? Do you want to email people? Do you have a list of emails that you can send the flyer to? Do you have to send a poster somewhere? So you have to think about all these things. But it's all about best practices. Always go back to the literature. Somebody has done similar research using this methodology. See how they were able to recruit participants and then follow those steps. And also you have to decide whether you want to use screening questionnaire. Screening questionnaire helps you to determine who qualified to be part of your study. You have a close-ended question, maybe 5 questions. Are you 18 and above? Yes. Do you have at least 2 years of work experience? Yes. So if they say yes to all the questions, then it can be qualified to be part of your study. The next one is the procedure. You are talking to your readers, people who are reading the information. You have to present the information in chronological order so that people will follow. You move from A and you go to B and you went to C so that people will follow. In case people want to do the same research, they will be able to do that. At this point, if you don't present in chronological order, you are confusing your readers. You don't want to confuse people. So you have to structure the information very well. How do you do it? First, list all the actions that you want to take in order to collect your data. What specific action do you want participants to take? What specific action that you want to take? Where will be the research location? How do you want to ask your questions? How long will the interview be? After listening all these events, arrange them in a chronological order. After recruiting participants, if you're doing a quantitative study, let's say you are doing a survey. So they qualify, they click on the link, they go to the survey. The survey has a screening questionnaire there to make sure that they qualify. They said yes to all the 5 or 6 questions. The system moved them to the consent form. They review the consent form, they click on agree, they want to be part of the study. They are aware of the studies. They answer all the demographic questions. Then they move on to the main survey questions. You put it in a safe place, maybe in an online platform, and then you collect all your information. So you see how presenting that information in a very detailed and chronological order makes things easy for you and also people who are going to read your procedure. Let's look in terms of interviews. The person has called you and said, oh yeah, I want to be part of the study. So maybe you schedule a time with the person. If you want to use online system like Zoom, you set up the Zoom. If you want to meet the person in a specific location, let's say you meet the person online or face-to-face. The first thing is to introduce yourself to them. Tell them your plans concerning your study. Try to build trust. Try to be transparent, because when you build trust, they open up and give you all the information that you need. Before even you book an appointment with them or book the time, you already review everything, make sure that they qualify. So the next step is to give them a consent form. Read a consent form to them, make sure that they understand, make sure that they know their role, make sure that they know what they have to do, and they are not being forced to be part of the study. They can leave the study at any time. So after all these, you ask them whether they have any questions before they sign. If they don't have any questions, they sign the consent form, and then you move ahead and start the demographic questions. And you go ahead and ask them about the main interview questions. You make sure that you record the conversation if they give you the chance to record. Always ask them, is it okay for me to record this conversation? Then after everything, you give them the chance to have the final say. You want them to end and make sure that they have said what they want to say. Sometimes the final thought might have nothing to do with the topic, but giving them the chance to end the conversation will be a very good thing. You also talk about the number of minutes that they have to spend. For interview, I think at most 60 minutes will be great. So that's how you want to present the information. Be systematic. Make sure that you are not throwing information to your audience or readers. Make sure that the information is well thought through, well planned, systematic, and chronological. So let's go to instrumentation. So instrumentation is all about the specific instrument that you want to use for your study. And the instrument in terms of the tools that you want to use to extract data and also store data, maybe use it to analyze too. So if you're doing a quantitative study and you're using a survey instrument, people want to know the name of the survey, the features of the survey in terms of the variables the survey is measuring, who developed the survey, is the survey validated, the number of items, the subscale, reliability, and validity, all the information that people want to know about the instrument, you have to provide that. For a dissertation, I always recommend that you get already developed validated instruments, because it takes a long time to validate instruments. Developing your own instrument, you might not be able to measure. It's like you are trying out an instrument that has not been used before. How will you be sure that the instrument that you have developed is measuring maybe happiness? How are you going to be sure? So you always have to look into the literature, find an instrument that can measure the variable that you intend to measure. Sometimes you may have to make an adjustment to your variable to match with the instrument that you have identified. You could develop your own instrument, but maybe you can use your study to validate the instrument. You always have to look around and see whether there are existing instruments that you can use to measure your variable. For a qualitative study, you can develop your own interview questions, because every study is unique. Every participant is unique. So you have to create your own interview questions. So make sure that the questions are consistent with the research question that you have. So you have to do some kind of mind map and brainstorm based on the research question. What questions should I ask participants? You list all the questions, make sure that the questions are simple. The questions are conversational in nature. You ask one question at a time. You always have to have some questions that as a follow-up question or prompts that will help participants to tell their story, to give more information, be able to collect rich data if you plan this way. Under instrumentation, you have to describe the questions that you're going to ask. You don't have to list all the questions. You just have to provide how you came up with the question, the components, and also refer readers to the appendix to get all the lists of questions that you developed. So that's all about the instrumentation. Beside this, you can also talk about the tools, like let's say you want to use recording device. You can talk about it. Any kind of information, any kind of tool that will help you to collect data from participants you want to describe. Remember, you are not only providing this information to your readers, you are providing information to future researchers in case they want to do the same research, use the same tools. They can go and get all the information when they read your document. And if you are doing a qualitative study, as a qualitative researcher, you are an instrument. Because you are an instrument, you can talk about yourself under instrumentation. People want to know, who are you? What kind of experience do you have in relation to that topic? What is your philosophical paradigm? Are you using interpretive paradigm? Are you using constructivism? Are you using any kind of paradigm, like a transformative paradigm that is informing your study? What kind of lens are you looking through? What are the biases that you have? What is your background? How are you going to set aside all your biases to make sure that your background will not overly influence the information that you are gathering, and how you're going to analyze your data? Then data processing, how are you going to analyze your data? So when you're doing a qualitative study, you want to study a population. So you draw a sample from the population. Then when you draw a sample, you let them complete a survey or a questionnaire for you to help you to measure a specific variable or a group of variables. Then that will help you to generate data. Then you conduct statistical analysis. And there are two different types. We have inferential statistics and descriptive statistics. Descriptive statistics, you are just describing your data. If there are categorical data like gender, you want percentages and also frequency. How many people were males? How many people were females? And what are the percentages? If continuous variable, you can look at the standard deviation and the mean. Let's say they gave you specific age and you want to get mean age. So that's all about the descriptive. You are just describing your data. Inferential statistics is more of trying to make sense of the data so that you learn from the population that you drew the sample from. So you can do t-test, find out whether there's a significant difference between two groups. You can do correlation, you can do ANOVA, and that will help you to learn from the population that you sampled from. Because you collected demographic information, you can do descriptive statistics, the mean and the standard deviation, the frequency, and also the percentages. Then you can also talk about the fact that if, let's say, you have a hypothesis that you have to test, you have to state the kind of statistical analysis that you want to use in terms of inferential statistics, right? Whether you want to do correlation, regression, t-test. I have a link here that will give you information about what tests you have to do based on the hypothesis or the research question that you have. So you can look at that information. If you are doing a qualitative study, yes, sometimes you can collect demographic information and then you can use descriptive statistics to present the demographic information. Sometimes too, you want to present individual demographics. So let's say you have 10 participants. People want to know the characteristics of each participant. Maybe their age, their marital status, their work experience, so you have a table, 10 participants, and each of them, you provide their information so that you show people who your participants are in terms of the study that you conducted. Then you have to also think about, okay, after demographic information, the data that you collected, how are you going to analyze that? So are you going to go through the transcript, identify significant information, assigning labels to them, developing codes, and then categorizing the code to develop themes, and then sometimes you have to connect the themes to develop theory. This presentation will be also helpful if you click on that. So quality assurance, sometimes you can say validity and reliability, but quality assurance captures the two concepts. When you're doing a quantitative study, you have to write about validity and reliability. In terms of validity, I think you have heard of external validity, making sure that your data can be generalized to the population. So when you're writing about external validity and you're doing a quantitative study, you want to describe what you're putting in place to make sure that your findings can be generalized. Sometimes there might be things that you may do in the study that will to cause your study not to be generalized to the population. So if you didn't randomly select participants from the population, you didn't sample participants from the population, it's very difficult for you to generalize your findings to that population because the characteristics of the sample doesn't necessarily reflect that of the population because you did not randomly select participants from the population. Being aware of the limit in terms of you generalizing your findings is very important. Also, internal validity. Normally, when you think about internal validity, what comes into mind is experimental design. Because when you're doing an experiment, you want to make sure that everything is controlled so that at the end of the day, you can attribute the changes that happen with the changes that happen on the dependent variable, you can attribute it to the independent variable. This is where you can say that your study has a high internal validity. But when you're not doing experiments, then what are you going to write under internal validity? Maybe you can talk about the fact that your study has low internal validity because you are not conducting an experiment where you randomly have to assign participants to a control group and experimental group. It's all about being transparent and then being honest and provide all the information to show to people whether your study has a high or low internal validity. When you are looking into instrument, if we say that this instrument is highly validated, you are saying that the instrument measured what it's supposed to measure. Let's say instrument A is supposed to measure happiness. Right? If instrument A has a higher validity, this means that instrument A truly measures happiness. Right? So if you are saying that your study is valid or your study have a higher validity, can we say that all the procedures you made concerning the methodology and the tools that they are using, they are all consistent, they are all helping people to trust the findings? You can think about your procedure and also the findings. What is the connection between the findings and the procedure? Should we trust the procedure that led to your findings? The same way that we can say, should we trust the instrument that helped us to measure a specific variable? So how are you going to make sure that we trust the processes that you pass through? We have to make sure that all the actions and decisions that you are making are consistent with the required action that has been set by a group of researchers. So when you are doing a qualitative study, there are structures or the standard that you have to follow. If you are doing a quantitative study, there are things, processes that you have to make sure you pass through. One example is that if you develop your own instrument and then you did not validate the instrument and you just measure the variable, people are not going to trust your findings because we don't know whether your instrument is measuring the findings and measuring the variables that you said the instrument is measuring. So you always have to make sure that all the processes that you are going through in terms of data collection, data analysis, making informed choices are in line with the requirement of research standard that has been set by this research community. So that's how I want you to think about validity. Let's go back to reliability. Can we repeat what you have done? Can I go through everything that you said you did in the methodology and get the same results? I will choose the same variables. I will choose the same instrument. I will choose the same participants. I will choose the same similar time that you collected your data, the platform that you used to collect your data from, everything. If I follow what you said you followed, can I get the same result? That is all about reliability, repeatability. Can I replicate the findings? So under reliability, what people want to know is that you are trying to provide all the information. You have the detailed information in the procedure and all the choices that you made under methodology. You are following all these things in the right way. If you follow all the things that you have provided, there's high probability that you're going to get a similar result. So can your study be replicated? In qualitative study, The concepts are very different. In order not to confuse you concerning this concept, whenever you think about credibility, think about the findings. What actions are you taking in your study to make sure that people trust your findings? That's what you have to describe under here. Some of the action that you could take is that you provided all the information concerning the procedure. You are transparent. You provided all the actions that you're going to take. You gave the rationale behind your actions, and then you collected data from participants. And then when you're analyzing, you provided step by step. So because you provided all this information, you are transparent in that, there's high probability for people to trust your findings. Transferability. When you think about transferability, think about context. Can we transfer your findings to similar context? What action are you going to take in your studies to make sure that researchers can transfer your findings to similar context? If you can provide the context, what is the context in your study? The context is participant background, the situation that they find themselves in, and also the research location, and any background information that will help future researchers to transfer your findings to a different or similar situation. Also describing yourself, because you are also part of the context, your background and biases and everything. In terms of transferability, you are going to ensure readers that you're going to provide all the detailed information about the context so that readers or future researchers can transfer the findings to similar context. Dependability. Is your procedure dependable? Can I follow your procedure and get similar results? Not the same result. Similar, because when you're doing qualitative study, my background can influence the process. So although I may follow the same pattern or the same steps, I may not get the same result, but I may get similar results. Have you provided all the detailed information that I can follow so that I will have similar results? That's all about dependability. Confirmability. Can somebody confirm what you found? Can another researcher confirm the themes that you develop? Can you use another methodology to confirm the other method that you use? So let's say you use interviews. Can you also use focus groups to see whether they arrive at the same kind of findings? Can you also use participants to confirm the findings that you got? So confirmability is more about either using participants, a different methodology to see whether that kind of methodology or participant can confirm what the other methodology has. So that's all about the confirmability. If you want to get more information, I put some information at the reference. You can click on it and get all the information. I'm spending a lot of time here because that's the area where I see that students struggle to provide that information. So getting to understand these concepts, you'll be able to use it. People will just want to know, what have you put in place to make sure that your findings are credible, your findings can be transferable, your procedures are dependable, also their findings can be confirmed by other entities. So let's go to limitations. So limitations are all the weakness associated with the actions that you are taking on, the choices that you made in your study. Doing a qualitative study, you cannot generalize. It's a limitation, right? So think about any action that you took in the study. What are the limitations? What are limiting you? And sometimes you can provide actions that you are going to take to address or to minimize that weakness. So that's what you can provide here. Ethical assurance. One thing that you can do is to provide the processes that your study will go through for it to be approved. And also, what are you going to do to protect participants? What are you going to do to protect their information? How are you going to store their information? How are you going to make sure that people will not get access, the third party will not get access to participant information? Then you end with a summary. A strategy is write a sentence representing each of these components, one sentence, and then you can put them together and you get a summary, right? So it's so simple when you reach the summary part of the chapter. So that's what I have for you